our zikr leader said that if Muhammad was alive today, he would be a vegetarian. And it's very interesting because for many Sufis, one of the central Sufi doctrines is that Muhammad is alive today. And I can make shahada that he is vegetarian. Okay. So, and in fact, this was the doctrine that got me into big trouble at IIUI, Islamic University, because it's very different from what the Wahhabis want, the picture the Wahhabis say. And I just said to my students, look, this is a central doctrine. Muslims are thinking like this. And in fact, in many Sufi circles, you are admitted to the majlis of the Prophet. And you have that vision. And in fact, someone else who's already in that majlis brings you in. So that's a very strong and deeply rooted Sufi belief and practice. So, and they were very upset about it, so I showed them some documentation about this. And anyway, that's another story. But let's say, so there is certainly, a belief about living Muhammad amongst Muslims, just like there is a belief about a historical Muhammad, right? So these are both belief systems that we participate in because we don't know, we did not meet that person in, like you and I are meeting today. So my talk today is called Khadija, a model worthy of emulation. And of course, Khadija becomes important for us because she's the wife of the Prophet. And so it is really about how do we conceive how do we conceive the Prophet? How do we conceive the Prophet? And for the period of this 1 hour or however many minutes we have, let's suspend whatever we believe about the Prophet and give ourselves the permission to reconceive or, believe or disbelieve or whatever, question, things like that. So my personal existential crisis centers around the seerah material on the Prophet, which has parts that I cannot relate to at all. And then the living Muhammad, which comes through the adab and the khulus of the relationships that are based in Sufi circles, in people who remember God and who love the Prophet. So for me, there's a huge sort of chasm between these two prophets. And I was asked to write an article about Khadija, and finally I gave up. I mean, I did lots of research, but the crisis sort of was so great that I thought I don't want to publish this. Now I'll get into trouble when I say something anyway. so Khadija, so that's sort of the space we are holding. And then we're just going to go look at what's been written about Khadija. And I have to say that whereas I feel a big sort of difference between the historical Muhammad, or even we can say Ibn Hisham's, Ibn Ishaq, Ibn Hisham, because that's the biography on which all subsequent biographies are now based. Even though at the time that it was being collated, it was challenged and questioned, and not everybody wanted to, give the authors of the seerah much credibility. But there are all these problems that Muslim scholars, historians of seerah know, but somehow it all gets washed away when, Haeckel writes the life of Muhammad and things like that. And then there is, the Sufis living Muhammad. But when it comes to Khadija, there is actually no problem. So Khadija actually, for me, is a person that, whether it's historical or I don't know how many of us connect to the living Khadija or have thought about that, there is no problem there. And when I started doing the research, here is what I found. First of all, in English, there's hardly, when I say in English, or let's say Western scholarship and Western academic scholarship, there is hardly anything written about Khadija. There was maybe a 2-page article in the 30s or 40s that was, by some Christian fellow. I think it was even Puri. Now, I wrote this a year ago, and then I haven't looked at this file. And it's like lots of work, and I still couldn't look at it. I did gardening instead, but a lot of it is in my head. So anyway, so here is Khadija, who is a very central figure. In growing up a Muslim, Khadija has a presence, and she is a central figure. So I was very shocked that not much is written about it. So I said, now how am I going to find out about Khadija to write this encyclopedia article? I looked at all the biographies, and all of them contain just little, 1 or 2 pages on her. Not much, just 1 or 2 pages. And I thought, wow, such an important figure and so little written on her. What's going on? And so it's a question of how we sort through all what I found and what the conclusions I came to. But I can just say that in looking at the academic stuff written on historical Muhammad, it's all based on Ibn Hisham. Even the Western scholars, except when you get to Vansborough, who just tell a very different story. So maybe we'll get to Vansborough at some point, but also if it gets very academic for you, just raise your hand and ask a very basic question. So we can ground it back to where you want this talk to be, because I don't know where to pitch it, right? I don't know you too well. So there is, in this literature, you have people who are sort of hostile to the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I'm sending, I should say that here. Okay. So they are hostile to the Prophet. So it's actually derogatory literature about Prophet, or you can see the hostility. And then there's some that's sort of neutral, and then there is some that's hagiographical. So in fact, another way, is that here is the author and here is the subject, right? So the subject is the Prophet, and the author can be a range of, So sometimes when it's neutral, then it's like this. The relationship between the author and the subject that they're writing about. And when it's hostile, we can present it like this. The Prophet is down here and the author is above the Prophet. And when it's hagiographical, then the Prophet is up here. So the author is looking up to the Prophet. So it becomes sacred history. And here this is sacred history, this is just history, and I don't know what you want to call this, but anyway. So you see these 3 trends. You see, yes?
Just what's hagiographical?
Okay, hagio just means when you're writing about saints. It's about, the genre called Life of the Saints? Okay, so is there a biography of St. Francis that people read in San Francisco? Yes.
It's a very Catholic thing.
Yes.
Where we have lives of saints, and that's called hagiography. Studying the lives of the saints.
Life of the saint. But which tradition the person who asked the question, which tradition are you from? You must have hagiographies, yes. Do you identify as a Muslim?
Yeah.
Okay, so then all the lives, like what we call the life of any prophet or the Sahabi, all of those are hagiographies or hagiographies, maybe whichever the right pronunciation is. And they are, because of we're talking about a certain attitude. So the person who speaks of the subject of their writing, even though the author is writing it, they're putting themselves below that person and they're looking up to them. And usually you see that from the kind of language they use. So for example, when you see things like, May God bless them. May God be pleased with them. Radiyallahu anha, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. That's the hagiography. Yeah, right? Because they think they're better than us, and we praise them, and so there is it's in a certain kind of language which is not neutral. That's religious and it's respectful. So is that clear?